What would you do if a desperate mother and her child appeared at your gate as the sun died? Elias Ward faced that choice and learned that a single act of kindness could summon a tribe, reshape a life, and teach him that compassion carries consequences. Subscribe and see where courage rides. Let's get started. The last light of the sun stretched across the red cliffs, painting everything in molten gold and deep shadows. Elias Ward paused for a moment, letting the warmth of the dying sun wash over him as he wiped the sweat and dust from his brow. His hands were rough, calloused from years of tending the land, mending fences, and setting traps against the relentless predators that haunted his lonely ranch. The air smelled of dry grass and iron, mixed with the faint, distant scent of smoke from a neighboring ridge. He had spent the entire day checking traps and repairing broken fen. Seas after the coyotes had been unusually bold this season. A restless tension clung to him, the kind only men who work alone on the frontier know, the constant awareness that danger could appear anywhere, at any time, without warning. As he straightened and began gathering his tools, something moved near the far fence. At first, he thought it might be an animal, a coyote perhaps driven by leftover scraps or the fading warmth of daylight, but the motion was awkward, uneven, almost human. The shape shifted under the long shadows, and as he squinted, his chest tightened. There was no mistaking it now. It was a woman, moving with trembling steps, draped in a torn buckskin dress, holding tightly to a small child. Every movement seemed to sap the last remnants of her strength, and the boy clung to her side like a lifeline, his face pale and gaunt. Elias's instincts kicked in immediately, a blend of caution and concern. He knew this land was dangerous, more than just the wild animals or the harsh sun. Raids, hunger, and violence had all left their marks here. And yet, there was something in the way the woman moved, the way she shielded the boy, that told him they were not trespassers in search of trouble. They were survivors. The boy's eyes met his, wide and filled with an innocence corrupted by far too much fear. Elias felt a lump rise in his throat, a sharp reminder of all he had endured. Alone, and all he had chosen to ignore in the world beyond his ranch. There was a tremor in the woman's legs, a sag in her shoulders, dried blood on the boy's arm, a testament to whatever horrors they had fled. He had seen fear before, had felt its weight pressing against him like a living thing. But this was different. This was desperation meeting hope in the faintest flicker of recognition. He took slow, careful steps forward, hands open and visible. Every movement was deliberate, measured. Years alone had taught him that fear made people unpredictable, that a sudden motion could ignite violence where none was intended. His voice, when he finally spoke, was gentle, but deliberate, carrying across the empty pasture like a soft ripple. "Ma'am, I'm not here to scare you," he said. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying his words to them, softening the intent. The woman did not respond immediately. Her eyes flickered toward him, then back toward the open stretch of land behind her, a vast, empty expanse stretching toward the horizon. Elias could see it in the way she held her breath, in the faint tightening of her jaw. She expected danger to emerge from that open distance at any moment. Perhaps she had spent too long on the run to trust the land itself. Or perhaps she had been trained to measure every step, every person, for threat or safety. Either way, the small spark in her gaze, a glimmer of hope, or a plea for mercy, was enough for him. The boy leaned heavily against her, his small frame shivering, a body weakened not by age, but by flight and fear. The way he gripped her dress, holding her like a lifeline, spoke volumes about the life he had been forced to lead. Elias's mind raced as he processed what he saw. Hunger, exhaustion, fear, trauma, all the signs were there, etched into the lines of their faces and the way they moved through the twilight. He did not know what hunted them, or the horrors they had survived, but he knew one truth with clarity. If he turned them away, they might not survive the night. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the choice pressing on him like the heat of the desert sun still lingering on his neck. His ranch was lonely, almost painfully so. He had chosen solitude for decades, finding a strange peace in the quiet rhythm of land and animals. Offering refuge could invite danger. He knew that, but leaving them to the unknown would have been unthinkable. There was a line between self-preservation and cruelty, and Elias had never been able to cross it without consequence. He pushed the gate open slowly, the old hinges creaking in protest. The sound startled a flock of birds in the nearby scrub, sending them skyward in a cloud of black shapes against the fading gold. "You can rest here," he said, voice steady and warm, as if carrying a promise without words. "My land has room for good people." The woman blinked, startled by the unexpected kindness. Her arm around the boy tightened, as though bracing herself for something she could not predict. Her eyes moved from the horizon behind her to Elias, assessing, weighing, calculating. Every inch of her body spoke of exhaustion, of a life lived in constant alertness, yet there was something fragile breaking through, the first thread of trust. She stepped forward, slowly, each motion deliberate, her legs trembling under her own weight. The boy nudged her side, tiny hands pressing against her like a lifeline to remind her they were moving forward. Elias watched them, kneeling slightly to lower his height, showing without words that he meant no harm. The wind tugged at his coat again, the chill beginning to creep in as dusk deepened into night. Firelight would be necessary soon, warmth against the coming cold. For a long moment neither spoke. The quiet stretched, broken only by the soft creak of the gate and the distant calls of wildlife. Then carefully the woman stepped through, crossing the invisible line that separated strangers from trust. She lowered her head slightly, a gesture of both gratitude and recognition of her vulnerability. Elias nodded in response, letting the moment exist without words, as if speaking could break the delicate bridge forming between them. The cabin awaited, humble and warm. The hearth glowed softly, casting dancing light on the wooden walls. Elias led them inside, pouring water into a basin and offering it first to the mother, then to the boy. They accepted cautiously, sips measured and deliberate. Tea. The boy's gaze was wary but trusting in small increments, a testament to lessons learned from hardship and survival. Elias watched silently, heart heavy with the responsibility now resting on him. He began preparing a simple stew, the rhythmic motions of chopping and stirring, filling the room with a quiet sense of order. The woman's eyes followed him, courageous but observant, while the boy leaned against the blankets, slowly surrendering to exhaustion. There was a fierce strength in the mother, a resolve that neither danger nor fatigue could diminish entirely. Elias admired it silently, knowing that survival was often a matter of heart, more than muscle. Night settled over the ranch, thick and quiet. Stars began to prick the sky, and the cold pressed against the cabin walls. The woman finally allowed herself a slight relaxation, leaning back against the warmth of the hearth. Elias sensed the tension easing slightly, though he knew the story behind those eyes was far from over. Trust would take time, patience, and proof. Words alone were not enough to heal the deep exhaustion and fear carried in the woman's bones. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of distant smoke and pine, reminders of the world beyond the ranch. Elias stepped onto the porch, boots crunching in the dirt, letting his gaze sweep the horizon. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of connection, fragile but undeniable. His small act, opening a gate, offering safety, had set something in motion far beyond his understanding. It was an act of courage, compassion, and humanity, the kind that reshaped destinies quietly and irrevocably. By the dim light of the dying day, Elias understood that the night would be long, but the presence of the mother and child had shifted the meaning of his life. Solitude was no longer his only companion. A sense of responsibility, of conviction of hope even in the face of an uncertain world, began to root itself firmly in his chest. Whatever awaited them beyond the horizon, he knew he would not turn them away. The last warmth of the sun left the cliffs, leaving only the shadows and a breeze. Elias looked once more at the pair now resting inside, faces softened by fatigue, yet hardened by survival. The frontier was a harsh place, but tonight, within the modest walls of his cabin, it held a glimmer of something rarer than any gold or land. Trust. The boy leaned heavily against his mother, Kaelin clutching her side as if it were the only anchor left in the world. His small body sagged with exhaustion, and for a moment the woman, Ayanna, hesitated at the gate. Her eyes flickered over the wide, empty landscape beyond, till alert for danger that might emerge from the fading shadows. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying dust and the scent of dry grass, but she took a deep breath and stepped forward, finally trusting Elias with a fragment of the safety they both desperately needed. Crossing the gate was like stepping into a fragile new world. The cabin, small and humble, offered warmth and a sense of permanence that Ayanna had not felt in months, perhaps years. Elias, tall and lean, with weathered hands and cautious eye, indeed stepped aside to give her space. Every motion he made was deliberate, meant to reassure without overwhelming. The firelight spilled across the wooden floorboards, softening the starkness of the interior. The smell of smoke and pine logs was comforting in a way she could not explain. And Kaelin's small grip on her dress loosened slightly as he explored the familiar pull of safety. Elias poured water into a basin, placing it first in front of Ayanna. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cup, measuring each sip as though it could vanish if handled too hastily. Kaelin followed her lead, mirroring the careful, deliberate drinking habits instilled by months of survival. Elias observed quietly, noting the delicate trust forming between them. He did not speak much. Words were unnecessary in the early moments of connection, but his calm presence and steady movements formed a silent bridge, one that Ayanna and her son were tentatively crossing. The room was small but sufficient. A wooden table, a single bed, blankets stacked neatly, and a stone hearth that glowed warmly. Elias moved with quiet precision, pulling a pot from the shelf and beginning to prepare a simple stew. He chopped vegetables with rhythmic motions, stirred the broth carefully, and glanced back at them from time to time. There was a subtle communication in the way he moved, an unspoken reassurance that here, within these walls, no immediate threat would reach them. Ayanna's gaze followed every movement, a mix of vigilance and cautious curiosity, yet her body relaxed slightly as the minutes passed. Kaelin leaned against the blankets, eyes heavy with fatigue. The boy had endured far more than his 10 years should have allowed. Flights across harsh terrain, hunger gnawing at his stomach, and the constant tension of unknown threats. And yet, as the firelight flickered across his face, Elias could see that fierce spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. It reminded him of himself in some ways, forced to grow up too quickly, learning to navigate a harsh world with only instinct and perseverance to guide him. Ayanna, 30 years old, carried the quiet strength of survival. Her hair, dark and streaked with dust, framed a face hardened by years of vigilance, but softened by love for her child. She moved with a deliberate grace, balancing exhaustion and the need to remain alert. Every glance she cast toward Elias measured him, weighed him, tested him. Trust had been a rare commodity in her life, and she did not give it freely. Yet the simplicity of his actions, the offer of water, the steady warmth of the fire, the open gate, began to dissolve the barriers she had erected. Night deepened outside, pressing cold against the cabin walls. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying faint echoes of distant predators and the open wilderness. Inside, the room glowed with firelight, offering both physical and emotional warmth. Elias stirred the stew, the sound of liquid and chopping filling the room like a gentle cadence, while Ayana finally allowed herself to rest against the wooden back of the chair. Kaylin's small hand found hers, and she let her eyes close for the briefest of moments. Relief and exhaustion tangled together, but a sense of fragile safety began to take root. By the time the stew was ready, the smell of cooked vegetables and broth filled the cabin, a stark contrast to the raw, unforgiving landscape beyond. Elias served the meal carefully, placing bowls before mother and child. They ate slowly with measured bites, as if savoring not only the food but the simple fact of nourishment, the tangible proof of survival. Kaylin occasionally glanced at Elias, eyes wide and tentative, testing the stranger who had offered them refuge. Ibayana, equally cautious, mirrored the boy's small gestures of trust, allowing herself the first taste of warmth and sustenance in weeks. After the meal, the fire burned brighter, pushing the cold back into the shadows outside. Elias moved to the doorway, his silhouette framed by the night and the soft glow of the cabin's interior. He watched the horizon, sensing a shift he could not yet identify. There was a stillness, a tension in the wind, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He did not know it yet, but the quiet night carried a warning, or perhaps a promise, that would arrive with the first light of morning. Ayana helped Kaylin to the blankets, settling him with a gentle firmness that belied her own exhaustion. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the child's hair, brushing the dust from his forehead, but her gaze remained vigilant. She whispered soft words, fragments of lullabies learned from her mother, small comforts against the harshness of their reality. Elias watched them, noting the tender interaction, aware that this fleeting moment of peace was a rare gift in a world often defined by survival and fear. The night deepened, and the landscape settled into shadows and silence, yet Elias remained uneasy. He had opened his gate, offered refuge, and extended trust, but the consequences of kindness on the frontier were often unpredictable. He knew the risks: raiders, opportunists, those who might take advantage of generosity, but he also knew the moral weight of inaction. He had chosen the path of compassion, and that choice would ripple outward, carrying implications he could not yet foresee. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the land seemed to shift. The cool air brought a strange vibration, faint at first, then growing steadily. Elias stepped onto the porch, boots crunching softly on the dirt, and squinted at the distant ridges. Dust rose in faint clouds, but it was not the wind. Something moved across the valley, riding with purpose. Shapes emerged, horses, mounted figures, their silhouettes framed against the early gold of sunlight. Elias's chest tightened as the realization struck. These were no ordinary travelers. By the time the sun fully illuminated the valley, a circle of mounted Apache warriors had formed around the ranch. Painted horses snorted into the crisp morning air, and spears glinted like fire against the dawn. Women rode tall, proud, carrying baskets and tending to children, while older men sat upright on their horses, faces carved with lines of endurance and wisdom. Elias froze, a mix of awe, fear, and respect washing over him. His small act of kindness, the gate opened, the cabin offered, had summoned something far larger than he had imagined. The leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with long black hair tied in leather strips, dismounted with effortless grace. Feathers along his lance fluttered like small birds between breaths. His eyes, dark and piercing, studied Elias with measured attention. "I am Taza of the White Mesa," he said, voice calm but carrying authority. "You gave safety to one of ours. That makes you no longer a stranger on this land." Elias's voice caught in his throat, and he could only nod, sensing the weight of the words in the still morning air. Ayana stepped forward, her posture straight, radiating the quiet dignity of someone who had endured much yet remained unbroken. Kalen followed, standing taller than his small frame should allow, down a steadiness in his eyes that spoke of courage beyond his years. "You sheltered us," she said softly, carrying the weight of her gratitude and the wisdom of her people. "And our tribe honors that choice." Taz's gaze softened, acknowledging Elias's decision without threat. "Hospitality freely given binds paths together," he explained. "Your kindness will be remembered, not as a favor, but as a bridge." The murmurs of the tribe spread through the cirque. A quiet acknowledgement, a shared recognition of trust, of truth, of the bonds that arose from selfless acts. Elias struggled to find words, realizing that nothing he said could fully capture the depth of the moment. I just offered shelter." Ayana's expression remained calm but measured. "Shelter is never simple," she said. "It carries weight. Consequences follow where compassion leads." Kalen reached for her hand, and she squeezed it gently, a reminder that family, survival, and trust were intertwined. The tribe moved slowly, adjusting tents and blankets, feeding horses, and attending to children. Elias watched them, overwhelmed yet steady. Their presence transformed his ranch, filling it with life, movement, and sound that he had long thought impossible. Iris flickered across the yard like stars brought down from the heavens, and laughter, a sound he had forgotten, echoed through the morning. Kalen approached him, clutching a small leather pouch. "For protecting my mother," he whispered, placing a carved stone horse into Elias's hand. The gesture, simple yet profound, carried the weight of gratitude, trust, and legacy. Elias felt a lump rise in his throat. He knelt slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "I'll take good care of it," he promised, feeling the bond solidify in that quiet, enduring moment. By midday, the ranch had become a temporary village. Ayana Kai, and the tribe moved with purpose, preparing for their journey, but leaving traces of trust and humanity behind. Elias sat near the fence, speaking with elders who had lived lifetimes beyond his own, absorbing stories of seasons, survival, and the unbroken spirit of a people tied to the land. Ever, a word reinforced a truth he had only begun to understand. Small acts could ripple across generations, reshaping the world in ways both tangible and unseen. As the sun climbed higher, Elias felt the weight of responsibility transform into a sense of purpose. His quiet ranch, once lonely and predictable, now pulsed with connection, trust, and shared history. The carved stone horse rested in his pocket, a reminder that kindness carried consequences, often larger than one could imagine, yet always worth the risk.